Hi, I'm Hal Roberts. This is Bridge City News. Here's some of the top stories we've been following. Officials from the International Atomic Energy Agency are concerned about damage left behind by Russian troops at the closed Chernobyl nuclear plant in Ukraine. Construction has begun on a new $7.4 million wetland project around Tabor. BCN's Angela Stewart has the details. And we hear from our legislative reporter Tyler Dawson, who discusses how the UCP Leadership Review may unfold.
Your nation, your province, your southern Alberta. From the heart of Lethbridge, it's Bridge City News with Hal Roberts.
Thanks so much for joining us. The International Atomic Energy Agency said Russian troops risked causing a major accident attempting to seize control of the Chernobyl nuclear plant as the war with Ukraine rages on.
Physical integrity of one nuclear power plant, Zaporizhia, was compromised. We had also situations where the external power was interrupted, including here. So there were a number of events that were compromising the normal operation of any nuclear facility. Those were avoided, but of course, as I was saying just now, the situation is not stable, so we have to keep on alert. There is a lot of work to be done after the occupation of this plant. We have been working with the regulator, with the Ukrainian regulator. We have to assess the situation. We have to do some repair work so we can restore the connectivity that we have with Vienna, so we can provide good information to the Ukrainian people and to the rest of the world.
Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky visited a hospital in Kyiv and met with children evacuated from Mariupol. Now, these are the children whose parents were killed during fierce fighting in the city. Tens of thousands of Ukrainians and Russians have died since Russia invaded Ukraine in late February. Third parties estimate that the losses among Russian troops are the greatest. British Defense Secretary George Wallace says around 15,000 Russian troops have been killed since the invasion began, while Ukrainian President Zelensky said around 3,000 Ukrainian military have lost their lives. The United States and Russia pulled off a dramatic prisoner exchange, trading a U.S. Marine veteran jailed in Moscow for a convicted Russian drug trafficker serving a long-term prison sentence.
We have just learned of a very dramatic prisoner swap that took place in Europe involving a U.S. Marine veteran named Trevor Reed, who's been jailed since 2019 in Russia. He's been traded in Europe for a Russian cocaine smuggler by the name of Konstantin Yarchenko, who has been imprisoned in federal prison in Connecticut here in the United States. It's hard to know exactly how this will all play out down the road, but one of the things that makes this truly extraordinary is the diplomatic context in which this is taking place. Relationships between the United States and Russia are at their lowest points in decades because of Russia's war with Ukraine. So there's been clear antagonism between these two global powers. So the fact that they were able to make any sort of agreement or reach any sort of resolution is pretty striking and remarkable.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's family vacations to the private island of the Aga Khan 6 years ago were once again the subject of debate at the House of Commons. Recently released internal RCMP documents show the force considered pursuing a criminal investigation. Interim Conservative leader Candace Bergen pressed Trudeau on whether he used a loophole to avoid being charged.
Fraud, Mr. Speaker, fraud on the government. That's the charge the RCMP considered laying against the Prime Minister for taking an exotic holiday as a free gift in 2016. Recent documents show the RCMP knew he committed the illegal act, but they also knew there was a loophole that he could have used. As silly as it might sound, the Prime Minister could have written himself a note, given himself permission to take the holiday. So my question is this: did the Prime Minister give himself permission to take that free holiday in 2016?
This matter was settled years ago when the Ethics Commissioner released the report. While the Conservatives continue to focus on petty politics and on me, we're going to continue to focus on Canadians, on investing in housing across the country, in $10 a day childcare for families, in continuing to lead on world-class investments in fighting climate change.
Federal Environment Minister Jerry DeMarco says a price on carbon emissions is an essential tool for climate action, but Canada needs to do more to ensure it is fair and equitable. DeMarco also criticized the government for failing to help energy workers transition away from fossil fuels.
Effective carbon pollution pricing drives changes in consumer and producer behavior that in turn reduce overall greenhouse gas emissions. Carbon pricing is therefore essential if Canada is to finally succeed in significantly reducing its greenhouse gas emissions. We found that the department had ensured that carbon pricing systems were in place in all provinces and territories. So on the just transition, which is a critically important initiative, the government has been slow off the mark, and they're unprepared for the transition to a low carbon economy in terms of making sure that communities and workers are not left behind.
You know, when it comes to policies governments are putting forward to tackle the climate crisis, many are not meeting those targets. That's according to Robert Lyman, who's an energy and environment public policy consultant. Lyman says, if anything, emissions have actually increased over the years.
What is the prospect that the world's governments will be able to agree to a plan to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions? They've been meeting to try to do that since 1990. So it's over 30 years now. And they have set a series of targets, but as a result of over 30 years of experience, the greenhouse gas emissions in the world have increased by 60% over that period of time, not decreased.
Make sure you catch the full interview with energy policy consultant Robert Lyman and BCN's Jeanette Rocher coming up later in our show. The UCP Leadership Review is underway. Voting members have until May 11th to get their votes in to decide whether or not Jason Kenney should remain on as leader. The results will be made known on May the 18th. Our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, gives his thoughts as to what may transpire.
What we could see is Jason Kenney having, an overwhelming victory. Caucus falls in line behind him. He says, look, you guys need to stop messing around, criticizing me in public. We're a year from an election. Everybody, pull the oars without causing too much trouble. The other scenario, maybe the more likely scenario, is that Jason Kenney squeaks by, with somewhere between, say, 50 and 65%. And then the question is, can he hold on to the party leadership with that level of endorsement? What will his caucus do? What will the grassroots do? Will people in the caucus leave and go sit as independents? Or will they fall in line and, play ball until the next election?
Tyler Dawson will also discuss how Premier Jason Kenney is planning a multi-million-dollar PR campaign to promote Alberta energy in the United States. He'll have details coming up after business news. The opposition NDP in our province says Albertans are paying way too much for car insurance, especially since the UCP removed the rate cap back in 2019. NDP finance critic Shannon Phillips says with inflation at an all-time high, the last thing Albertans need right now are constant rate increases by insurance companies.
Many Albertans saw double-digit increases to their premiums, with some going up by as much as 30%. And those rate increases continued through 2020, despite the pandemic, despite the fact that people were driving a lot less. We heard from Albertans who had to abandon driving their car because they couldn't afford their insurance payments. The UCP's own budget projections show that over the next 3 years, your car insurance premiums are expected to increase by 14% above population and inflation growth. That means Albertans will pay $891 million more in car insurance premiums over and above population growth and inflation.
Now here's a follow-up to a story we first brought you yesterday about concerns a number of farmers and ranchers had about not being able to access the water supply from the Oldman River and how it may have been blocked on the Piikani Nation. Now, since we first brought you the story, it appears as though the situation may have been resolved. In a release, Chief Stan Greer says an agreement has been reached between the Piikani Nation and the province in regards to the Oldman River project. While terms were not disclosed, Lethbridge Northern Irrigation District permit holders will now have access to water for the 2022 irrigation season. A report from Stats Canada says Canadian farmers are expected to plant more wheat, corn, oats, lentils, and soybeans this season. But areas seeded to canola, barley, and dry peas is expected to decrease compared with last year. Here in Alberta, farmers expect the total wheat area to increase 6.3%. In Saskatchewan, producers anticipate seeding 10% more wheat, but 8% less canola. And in Manitoba, producers anticipate planting 5.7% more wheat. A groundbreaking ceremony on a new wetlands project took place Wednesday morning near the town of Tabor. BCN's Angela Stewart was there and got a sneak peek at the construction project and explains how vital storm water storage is for the town.
We were able to basically work with some specialists and be able to start and envision this project.
Shovels are in the ground and building has begun on the new Tabor East constructed wetlands. A collaborative effort on the project between the town of Tabor and the irrigation district began in 2015 as there was a need to fix the town's storm water storage.
That basically entailed looking at ways of being able to take stormwater intake into the Tabor irrigation district works. But we recognized that to be able to do so, we needed to focus on water quality to make sure that it was of a high quality nature and that it wasn't full of contaminants.
The project was officially added to the town's stormwater management plan in 2017. However, just a year later, Tabor was hit with massive flooding, resulting in tons of damage.
This kind of a project definitely helps mitigate those type of events that are unforeseen and can't generally be planned for.
The design process began on what will soon be the fully functioning wetland area. Well, as you can see behind me, this project is pretty massive. It covers about 22 acres of land and features storage volume of 100,000 cubic meters for stormwater runoff and storage depth sitting at 1 meter when all is said and done.
This is something that you would see is a bit larger than what some other wetland projects that you would see.
The site sits on the east side of the town, directly adjacent to the reservoir.
The marshland that's going to be part of this is just kind of part of the natural landscape that's here, so it's just an enhancement of what's going on in the area already.
The Tabor Wetlands project is slated to be completed for 2023. Reporting from Tabor for Bridge City News, I'm Angela Stewart.
It was so nice to be close to seasonal temperatures once again here in southwestern Alberta. Jeanette Rocher is in now with an early look at the forecast. Jeanette, it appears as though the warm temperatures may be sticking around our region for quite some time.
Yeah, we're going to be in the teen temperatures all week. Hal didn't quite get there today. We're looking at 13 degrees. We hovered around 11 degrees today. Into this evening, lots of wind as well, up to 50 gusts. Clearing overnight, though, bringing us some sunshine for tomorrow. Increasing cloud, though, later on in the day for Thursday. High of 14, though. As for the rest of the week, we're looking at those double-digit teen temperatures. I'll have all the details coming up later on in the newscast.
Great. Thanks so much, Jeanette. You may start to see some green bins in some areas of our city. Lethbridge began rolling out 1,900 compost bins in the Legacy Ridge and Hardyville neighborhoods on the north side. You'll also see them in the Varsity Village neighborhood on the west side. The bins are part of Phase 1 of the city's Curbside Organics program. James Nichols, the Waste and Operations Manager for the city, says residents are encouraged to provide feedback and that the 50% of current waste could go into green bins.
Just looking forward to rolling out Phase 1, working with residents to find something that works for them. We really ask that people engage with us. Reach out via 311, reach out via social media. Let us know what's working and what's not. Phase 1 is meant to be a learning experience for us so that we can make our full rollout a true success. We know that over half of what's going into our waste stream right now is divertible material into our green cart. So we're really optimistic that we're going to see a significant move away from collection in the waste carts. It's going to give a lot of people an opportunity to potentially even downsize the cart size that they have at this point in time as they start to utilize their green cart.
The Curbside Organics program is set to roll out citywide in the spring of next year. Firefighters work tirelessly every day to keep our communities safe. The Firefighter Stair Climb Challenge is encouraging our first responders to climb steps from May 27th through June 5th to raise funds for programs and services for citizens and firefighters who are battling cancer. BCN's Micah Quinn has more on a Lethbridge firefighter who will be climbing over 1,200 steps in Lethbridge for this great cause.
For our stair climb in Lethbridge, we climbed the tower and we did all those steps, and that's how many steps that they climbed in 9/11, and so that was really a really powerful message to climb all the steps and show how hard people had to fight and then ultimately sacrifice themselves in the end. So
Lethbridge firefighter Carl Mix will be competing in the virtual portion of the Firefighter Stair Climb Challenge, where he will ascend and descend the stairs located by the high-level bridge in our city. Mix's team is hoping to raise $1,000 for the challenge.
I chose to partake in this because I thought it would be a good way to provide awareness for this cause, as well as provide awareness for our Lethbridge Firefighters charities as well, and some of the good things that we do while team building and doing something fun with my daughter.
The climb will be 13 laps, which means Mix will do 96 stairs per lap, and he will be decked head to toe in his full firefighting gear. The proceeds for the challenge will go towards the non-medical needs for cancer patients, which will be provided by Wellsprings Calgary.
Counseling, a lot of the different things that they may need in their home, stuff like that. There's also a portion of the proceeds go to the Calgary Charitable Association as well, which helps out firefighters in need with other needs as well.
Mix's team name is the Lethbridge Firefighter Charities, and for more information on the Firefighter Stair Climb Challenge, you can visit calgarystairclimb.com. For Bridge City News, I'm Micah Quinn.
This is National Volunteer Awareness Week, and volunteers from Coaldale attended an event on Wednesday afternoon to celebrate. A number of volunteers from the town were honored and presented with awards from the Family and Community Support Services to showcase the hard work they do in the community.
And so what we decided to do as an organization is to honor those volunteers who support our programs, but also others, and give them a little gift of appreciation. And so that includes a little package of like a seed starter kit. And so they can help for them helping us grow as a community. We're helping them start a little garden. So what they did is folks across the region nominated volunteers and they sent us their names, and then we went around to all these different communities, including Coaldale, to honor those volunteers and to appreciate them and to give them their little gift.
Organizers from the Family and Community Support Services said they also presented awards to volunteers from Picture Butte and Sterling earlier this week. While the Lethbridge Hurricanes have their backs against the wall following a 4-1 loss in Game 3 on Tuesday night. Now, the Lethbridge Hurricanes trail the Edmonton Oil Kings 3-0 in the best-of-7 first-round WHL playoff series. Edmonton goalie and Detroit Red Wings first-round pick Sebastian Cossa has stopped 75 of 77 Canes shots in the series so far. Game 4 goes on Thursday night at the NMAX Center. The Hurricanes have never come back from a 3-game deficit in a playoff series in their franchise history. We wish the Canes the best of luck. Well, it was a great day to enjoy lunch or dinner outside in southwestern Alberta today since it was fairly warm, and that warming trend will continue. A complete look at the weather picture is coming up. We had sunshine mixed with clouds today and got fairly close to our seasonal average in the mid-teens. Jeanette Rocher is in now with all of the weather details. Jeanette, the warm and dry conditions should continue over the next few days?
No, we should stay dry for a little while, Hal. No more rain until later on next week. Into this evening, though, 50-kilometer-per-hour wind gusts, clearing overnight. Into Thursday, we're going to be seeing sunshine in the morning, increasing clouds throughout the day. High of 14. 14 is where we're going to stay. Into Friday with mainly cloudy skies. Beautiful on Saturday. Look at that sunshine. 17 degrees the high. 16 on Sunday, 14, back to 14 there on Monday with mainly cloudy skies. Rain developing overnight Monday evening, and then into Tuesday, we're looking at a chance of showers, 13 degrees the high. So like you were saying before, it is really great to be hovering around those seasonal averages. Finally, average high for this time of year, 15. Average low, 1 degree. 29 degrees was our high temperature on this day back in 1987. And in 1960, we were sitting at minus 11. Very chilly for this time of year. 6:16 was our sunrise this morning, and 8:42 is our sunset this evening, giving us close to 14 and a half hours of daylight. That's a sure sign that summer is coming. Over on the west coast tomorrow, mix of sun and cloud in Victoria, 11 degrees the high, 12 the high in Vancouver. Edmonton, sunshine, but a bit windy. We're looking at 20 to 40 kilometer-per-hour wind gusts there. 12 degrees the high, 13 the high in Calgary tomorrow with beautiful sunny skies. So actually, Edmonton's going to be getting more wind than the Chinook territory tomorrow. That's a little bit different for them. Sunshine tomorrow in Saskatoon, 19 the high, 15 the high in Regina. Partly cloudy skies. Winnipeg expecting some showers tomorrow, better than flurries, which is what they have had. 8 degrees the high there in Winnipeg. Now, as we look to the central part of the country, Toronto seeing lots of sunshine, double digits there, 10 degrees the high, 9 the high in Ottawa, sunny skies, and a mix of sun and cloud in Montreal with 10 degrees the high. As we look to the east coast, Fredericton is going to be seeing a mixed bag of precipitation mixed with snow and rain. So they're looking at 2 centimeters of snow, 10 to 15 millimeters of rain in Fredericton tomorrow. 4 degrees the high, chance of showers in Halifax tomorrow. That's a 30% chance there, 6 degrees the high. 30% chance of showers tomorrow in Charlottetown as well. 11 degrees the high there as well. St. John's, Newfoundland, looking at a mix of sun and cloud, and 5 degrees the high there in St. John's. So there you have it. That is your forecast.
A new report says low-income Canadians will suffer the biggest hit from rising inflation and borrowing costs. The report by RBC Economics says that the group will spend as much or even a larger share of their earnings on consumer purchases due to higher inflation. It also says a return to a Bank of Canada overnight rate of 2% will hike household debt payments by 15% or around $2,000. But RBC economists say the debt service ratio of low-income Canadians will rise at twice the speed of high-income households throughout next year. The central bank's key interest rate is at 1%, but warned of further hikes to come to fight inflation. New data from the 2021 census reveals that Canada's population of 55 to 64-year-olds has never been so high. Also, the gap between those 15 to 24 has never been so wide. A Stats Canada demographer says this growing gap is one factor in the labor shortage the country is currently experiencing.
One of the key highlights of this release is the fact that Canada is at a very special place right now. We could even say it's a date with demographic destiny, as the number and the share of people between age 55 and 64 who are close to retirement, usually, among this population, this working age population, 15 to 64, has never been that high. There are very large implications of this situation, and it is certainly one factor explaining the current labor shortages that Canada is experiencing.
Cenovus Energy is increasing its dividend as its first quarter profit was more than 7 times higher than last year. The Calgary-based company says its profit rose to $1.6 billion from $220 million a year earlier. Revenue was also up 74% to $16.2 billion. Cenovus also announced its base dividend will increase to 42 cents per share from 14 cents. It says it will also return cash to shareholders through share buybacks and or variable dividends. Now, here's a look at today's markets. The TSX was up 53 points on the day to finish at 20,744. The Dow was up 61 points to 33,301. The S&P 500 was up 8 points to 4183, and the Nasdaq was down 1 point to 12,488. West Texas Intermediate Oil was up 32 cents to 102.02 US per barrel. Natural gas was up 42 cents to 727 US. Gold was down 8 cents to 1886.02 US an ounce, and silver was down a cent to 23.29 US an ounce. Feed wheat is at $14.29 per bushel, barley's at $10.02, canola's at $27.39, and corn is at $12.14 per bushel. Live cattle were down $1.50 to $138.50. Feeder cattle were unchanged at $156.20, and lean hogs June contract is down 83 cents to $110.35. The Canadian dollar was even over the past 24 hours at 78.01 US. Recapping one of our top stories, Prime Minister Justin Trudeau's family vacations to the private island of the Aga Khan 6 years ago were once again the subject of debate at the House of Commons. Recently released internal RCMP documents show the force considered pursuing a criminal investigation against the Prime Minister. Interim Conservative leader Candice Bergen pressed Trudeau on whether he used a loophole to avoid being charged. Trudeau countered by saying the Ethics Commissioner already cleared him of any wrongdoing. The Ucp Leadership Review is underway, with Conservative Party members having until May 11th to mail in their ballots. Coming up, a chat with our legislative reporter, Tyler Dawson, about how the review of Jason Kenney's leadership may unfold. Tyler will have details for us in just a moment. On May 18th, we will have the results of the Ucp Leadership. Will Premier Jason Kenney remain on as party leader? Will he receive his minimum 50+1 vote, or will we see a potential new leader? To discuss this in more detail is our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent with the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Tyler, the votes have to be in by May the 11th. Kenney has had his distractors and his supporters. Can you explain what will happen if Kenney loses and what will happen if he wins and just stays on?
Yeah, I mean, it's sort of a who knows situation. So if Kenney loses, that's relatively straightforward. He'll step down, they'll go into a leadership race. Who knows who the next leader could be? I think probably safe bet is Brian Jean, but there's a few other possibilities in there as well. If Jason Kenney wins, this is where things get complicated. What we could see is Jason Kenney having, an overwhelming victory. Caucus falls in line behind him. He says, look, you guys need to stop messing around, criticizing me in public. We're a year from an election. Everybody, pull the oars without causing too much trouble. The other scenario, maybe the more likely scenario, is that Jason Kenney squeaks by, with somewhere between, say, 50 and 65%. And then the question is, can he hold on to the party leadership with that level of endorsement? What will his caucus do? What will the grassroots do? Will people in the caucus leave and go sit as independents? Or will they fall in line and, play ball until the next election? So, I think May 18th is going to answer this question of whether or not Jason Kenney has the confidence of the party, but how much confidence does he have if he wins is really going to be the next sort of big question. And honestly, I don't know what's going to happen. If I had to bet money on it, I would bet on Jason Kenney winning the review. But the question of how much is really, really an open one right now and what that's all going to mean.
Do you think it also works to his advantage, the fact that they opened up to all of the party membership, like around 50,000, as opposed to the angry voters who were going to be attending in Red Deer originally for the review?
Well, that's exactly it. So I do think that helps him. When you had a $100 or so fee to go to Red Deer, you had 15,000 or so people promising to go. No doubt that's the group of people that feel really strongly about Jason Kenney, whether they're in favor of him or whether they oppose him. I suspect that was probably skewed towards those who oppose him. But, if you look at the whole swath of the Conservative Party or UCP membership, you have people there who maybe don't feel super strongly about Jason Kenney, but who maybe feel strongly about winning the next election or maybe feel strongly about party unity. It just casts a far wider net. And, when it sort of comes down to the votes, let's take a completely different example of the Fort McMurray by-election, where there was a strong alternative to the United Conservatives with the Wild Rose Independence Party. They were running their leader in that by-election, and he didn't even get as many votes as the New Democrat in that riding. So, when it comes to casting the ballot, I think people tend to go with, the person they know, even if they're not super passionate about him. They might have strong feelings about going into a leadership race a year from an election. So it's a long-winded way of me getting around to saying that I think you're right, that this probably does favor Kenney in some fashion to go to the entire party membership.
Many Kenney supporters I've spoken with as well are saying the reason why the party needs to be unified behind Jason Kenney, he's the only one who can defeat or can continue on and not allow Rachel Notley and the NDP to take over his government, that he's the strongest candidate. So remains to be seen what's going to happen with that. Tyler, there was apparently a bit of drama when House Leader Jason Nixon got into it with independent MLA Todd Loewen. Loewen implied that Nixon said false things about him, and Nixon wasn't too happy and yelled in the direction of the Speaker, Nathan Cooper. Tell me more.
Yeah, so this happened about a month ago. And of course, as people know, you can't call someone a liar in the legislature. It's, sort of unparliamentary language. And Loewen didn't actually say that, but he did kind of imply it. And Nixon used the F word and the D word loud enough, actually, that it got picked up by the sort of Hansard transcription. And this was, very unparliamentary language, and there was a point of privilege made about it. So this was all resolved this week when the Speaker sort of ruled on it. But the strange thing that happened is Jason Nixon apologized, but he wasn't there. He had a letter that was read out by the Deputy House Leader, Joseph Schau, I think. And, the apology was accepted and it was all sort of resolved. But, just sort of a weird situation in the legislature because Nixon wasn't there to actually make this apology. And, beyond just the little bit of drama, I think this probably goes to show, the extent to which there are some tempers running high and tensions within the United Conservatives right now. And for Jason Nixon in particular, actually, because as people probably know, he had someone contesting the nomination to be the UCP candidate in his riding in the next election. And Jason Nixon might have lost that, but the party stepped in and removed the other candidate and things like that. So all sorts of things kind of going on. And, you see a little bit here and there, maybe when some of those tensions are sort of bubbling over.
Yeah, a lot of passion in politics, as you and I can attest. Now, Tyler, you wrote that the UCP prevented an anti-racism bill from moving forward, a private member's bill brought forward by NDP MLA David Shepherd. Tell me more.
Right. So this was a private member's bill that would have sort of compelled the Alberta government to keep race-based statistics and report back on some of these things, and also create sort of a racism commissioner who would have analyzed government programming and policies for sort of equity reasons. And because it's a private member's bill, it doesn't automatically go to the legislature. It goes to a committee to evaluate whether or not it should proceed. And it isn't proceeding. And because it sort of split along party lines, the UCP voted against it. The NDP voted in favor of it, obviously. The UCP MLAs sort of argued that this required more consultation before they go forward on it, even if it was a noble bill, which is what one of the UCP MLAs said. Then another little interesting procedural quirk out of this is that the NDP had wanted some members of the public to sort of testify or speak about the bill, but they had to submit a list of names by, I think, April 11th, a certain date at any rate, and they missed that date. So none of these people could actually speak to it. So a little mistake maybe by the NDP there, and that bill isn't really going ahead at the moment.
We've been seeing a break at the pumps now that the provincial government has turfed the provincial sales tax on fuel right now, 13 cents a litre, which is helping a lot of us. Now, the province could also be giving us some gas bill rebates as natural gas as early as June to provide relief for consumers who've seen some pretty huge utility bills this winter. Tyler, how much relief are we talking about here?
Well, we're talking all total at the moment about $150. So it's sort of $50 a month for, I think, January, February, and March bills. And as everyone watching this knows, bills have done some crazy things the last few months. So this is part of sort of a cost of living relief package, I guess we could say. And that legislation has been tabled. Relief could come as early as June. And then they're also sort of looking forward to next fall and saying that rebates could kick in if natural gas gets above a certain level. I think $6.50 a gigajoule is sort of the threshold they're looking at, sort of similar to the $80 per barrel price that they've looked at for the fuel tax implementation. So there could be a little bit of relief here and there. The NDP sort of saying, is this enough? Is $50 enough to offset your $500 bill you might have had in January or whatever? But I think it more broadly goes to show how important cost of living stuff is right now. We talk about inflation, we talk about gas prices and all these sorts of things. And looking forward to the next year, is this maybe going to be an election issue in some fashion? And at this point, I think it's hard to say that it won't be, because it certainly looks like one of the biggest issues facing Albertans and Canadians as a whole.
If only we could do something now about the price of food right now too, which is just going through the roof. A recent insurance industry report, speaking of cost of living, shows that Alberta car insurance companies raked in $400 million more in premiums in 2020 versus 2019, yet paid out less in claims. I talked to a lot of people here under the age of 30, Tyler, in our newsroom, and they're paying through the teeth right now when it comes to their car insurance premiums. The UCP removed the cap for car insurance premiums in 2019, saying insurance companies were kind of struggling to make money. But that doesn't appear to be the case anymore.
No, and the NDP is really making a fair bit of hay with this, sort of saying that this is, big companies profiting off the backs of regular people and stuff like that. And they've also pointed to the systems in Saskatchewan and British Columbia, where there's, of course, government options, cheaper government options to sort of keep the price down a little bit on insurance. And Jason Kenney's come out and said, this is Soviet-style insurance. He wants the market to make these decisions and all that. So a bit of a strange scenario there where the UCP is being a little less generous, shall we say, on a cost of living issue. And premiums have come down a little bit since 2020 because I believe people weren't driving as much during the pandemic. That sort of brought some of these prices back down. But, it just goes to what we were talking about cost of living and how important that is for politics right now.
The province recently announced $2 million to help with the settlement of Ukrainian refugees. Tyler, what will the funding be going towards specifically?
Yeah, so it's sort of money to help them get settled in terms of getting driver's licenses, in terms of getting health information, some language and job programming, things like that. So it's sort of an interesting situation federally where they're sort of refugees, but they're actually being resettled, I believe, as temporary residents. So there isn't sort of the whole package of supports federally that a refugee might normally get. So this is sort of trying to plug some of those holes between what a refugee might get and what a regular immigrant, for example, might get. So a little bit of a confusing context there, I would say. But yeah, that's money going to help Ukrainians. Of course, there's a huge Ukrainian population in Alberta, some 350,000 or something like that, I think. So obviously a lot of sort of homegrown interest, shall we say, in helping these people get resettled to Canada. And obviously a lot of interest in helping these people too, because Canadians, everyone knows a Ukrainian or a Ukrainian family, and lots of Ukrainians have family back in Ukraine. So, I think a lot of interest on the government side and the public side on helping these people resettle.
Now, a story we recently had on Bridge City News is how the government is building a new $50 million clean hydrogen center. Now, Premier Kenney says Alberta is a big hydrogen producer, and he says the industry could be worth $11 trillion by the year 2050. Where is he getting those numbers from?
Yeah, I mean, the $11 trillion is a colossal number, and I can only assume that he means sort of worldwide. It's almost inconceivable that money would just be in Alberta, although we'd be paving the streets with gold if that turned out to be true. But he did point to government statistics that show that Alberta produces, I think, 2.4 million tons of hydrogen per year, which I think is the highest, makes us the largest hydrogen producer in Canada. And the government really wants to leverage our sort of energy extraction expertise and infrastructure to sort of pivot to hydrogen. This is sort of the next frontier, I guess, in the energy production game. So this center is supposed to bring together sort of business and research and government sort of expertise under the umbrella of Alberta Innovates, I think, sort of a crown corporation. Timeline is not super clear on that, but there's been indications for months now that Alberta was going to try and pivot to this. There's a hydrogen strategy that was released in November 2021, I think. This center announcement obviously is more of the same on that front. So I don't know when we start to see sort of returns on this, when we can say that this industry is, up and running. But another story this week by a colleague of mine at the Financial Post talking about TC Energy, which is looking at creating a hydrogen production facility near Crossfield, which would sort of use natural gas to produce hydrogen. So it seems from what I've gleaned from talking to people and what you read that this is a really sort of exciting new industry for Alberta, and the government is very, very keen on that.
There were reports that the Alberta government is planning a multi-million-dollar PR campaign in the United States, Tyler, opening a number of offices to promote Alberta energy, as we were just talking about, and spending millions in advertising and PR. Apparently, Kenney says it's been difficult getting the attention of Washington.
Yeah, so Joe Manchin was here a couple weeks ago, one of the most powerful senators. I believe he chairs the Senate Committee on Energy in the United States. And one of the things that came out of that meeting was Jason Kenney and presumably Sonia Savage, the energy minister, are going to be going to Washington at some point in the next few weeks to deliver a presentation on sort of North American energy security, how Alberta can help contribute to this. And one of the things Kenney said is, look, it's a win to even have someone like Joe Manchin come to Alberta. It's a win to even have the ear of someone in Washington and get some attention on that front. So there's some interesting things happening, at the personal level between Kenney and some politicians in the United States. He was obviously down there meeting with governors not that long ago as well. But there's also this Hearts and Minds campaign, I guess you could say, that they're looking at having, opening offices in a number of American cities, this big sort of PR push. What that'll look like is sort of hard to say. Whether or not the Canadian Energy Centre, that colloquially referred to as the War Room, is going to be involved, I don't know. But we do also have a trade mission down there. So there is, some of this infrastructure, diplomatic infrastructure, shall we say, that already exists, that it looks like they're trying to leverage into getting more investment and getting some support in the United States for maybe a new pipeline or something like that.
I'm glad you brought that up. Do you think there's ever a chance that maybe Kenney and Joe Biden can get together and maybe talk about potentially revisiting Keystone XL, especially since there's such a need south of the border for oil and gas right now?
Yeah, it's a good question. And, you get the sense from the federal government there hasn't been boatloads of engagement on that specific issue. I'm trying to think if a premier has ever met with the president, actually, and nothing leaps immediately to mind on that front. So I think maybe that's not super likely, but the argument Kenney's making is the U.S. midterms are coming up. There's a very good chance the Republicans are going to take both the House of Representatives and the Senate, and so that this is actually a good time to sort of meet with people in Washington and get more engagement on that front. So in that sense, I guess one could say you don't need the president necessarily if you can meet with the right people in Congress. But of course, there's the presidential permit side of this, which was the issue with Keystone. So lots of moving parts. Keystone itself seems to be dead in the sense that TC Energy, I think, has walked away from it and things like that. Is there an opportunity for another pipeline? Maybe. I think Kenney certainly hopes so from what he said to me. To bring that all around, in terms of concrete things that could happen in the near future. I mean, it's a pretty short list, non-existent list maybe to some extent.
He's our legislative reporter and the Alberta correspondent for the National Post, Tyler Dawson. Thanks again for your time today.
Always a pleasure, Hal.
Well, the federal government recently laid out its ambitious greenhouse gas emissions plan, which is a sector-by-sector approach for Canada to reach its new climate target of cutting emissions by 40% below the 2005 levels by 2030 and net zero emissions by 2050. Now, our guest today is well-versed in the issues of the economy and the environment. Robert Lyman has spent over 4 decades mainly for the Canadian federal government working as an economist, manager, and a consultant. Through his career, Robert worked on a broad range of energy and environment public policy issues, and he's written and presented extensively on the subject. He joins us today from Ottawa. Robert Lyman, welcome to Bridge City News. So great to have you on today.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be able to speak with you.
Thank you. Okay, so Robert, there's been an overwhelming amount of information about the environment and the drastic changes some say are needed. So now some, of course, believe that you are the person to speak to about where the economy and environmental policy meet. So I guess we want to first ask you that million-dollar question. In your opinion, in your expert opinion, will sharply reducing Canada's use of hydrocarbons reduce global temperatures by any meaningful amount?
Well, that is absolutely the key question. And to start with the answer, I guess I have to remind people that climate change is a global issue. It concerns the emissions that take place from all the countries in the world, and it affects the world's environment. Canada emits about 1.6% of the greenhouse gas emissions annually emitted. So right off the bat, you see that we're a very, very small part of the emissions issue. But the real question is, to what extent would reducing emissions of greenhouse gases in Canada or eliminating them altogether have any impact on the growth of concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere? According to the best estimates available now by Professor Ross McKittrick of Guelph University, if we completely eliminated all of our greenhouse gas emissions tomorrow, it would only reduce the concentrations of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere by about 3 parts per million. So that's negligible. There would be no possible way that you could even measure the effect of reducing Canada's emissions in terms of either the greenhouse gas trends or temperatures.
Wow, that's kind of fascinating. So why do you think that governments like Canada continue to pursue this idea then of reducing hydrocarbon?
Well, many people have been convinced, I guess, by what they've seen of the scientific studies that have been done by the United Nations and by the work that's been done through a number of different international conferences, that you can make a difference, if you will. And I won't get into the scientific issues. As you noted, I'm primarily an expert in policy and economics. One of the central issues concerns whether, even if the science that gives rise to concerns were valid, what is the prospect that the world's governments will be able to agree to a plan to significantly reduce greenhouse gas emissions? They've been meeting to try to do that since 1990. So it's over 30 years now. And they have set a series of targets, but as a result of over 30 years of experience, the greenhouse gas emissions in the world have increased by 60% over that period of time, not decreased. 2/3 of the world's emissions now come from the developing countries, the countries in Asia predominantly. And those emissions are growing rapidly, by far most of the emissions that are occurring in the world are occurring as a result of population and economic growth in Asia. So none of the targets that have been set by those international conferences have ever been met. Apart from a few European countries, no country in the world has ever met its greenhouse gas emission reduction targets. People still keep saying that are committed to these goals, but the reality is that that's not what's happening in the world.
Wow. And of course, we know that for many years now, the Canadian government's been providing subsidies for green energy. So would you say that these subsidies have been a net profit or a loss for the Canadian economy and the taxpayer?
Well, the subsidies is always a very interesting question because many people kind of in principle think of subsidies from government or from taxpayers to industry as a bad thing. The renewable energy industries, which include largely wind and solar energy and biomass energy that's used for power generation, receive, in fact, over 23 different kinds of subsidies or market advantages in Canada from all levels of government. There's so many of these different programs that there isn't even a proper an analysis of them. No one has ever looked at what the costs and benefits are. And it's mostly what we know about is what they cost in terms of the effects on electricity consumers and the effects on the taxpayer. In Ontario, which is the province that has gone the farthest in terms of implementing rate increases and guaranteeing contracts for renewable energy, the cost of these programs is about $4 billion a year, above what they would otherwise have paid. We know a lot more about the subsidies that are being paid to renewable energy projects in the United States because of the work that's been done there. And in the United States, I have some figures here, if I'll just quote them for you. The amount that has been devoted is over $375 billion in subsidies to renewable energy in the United States. In fact, I mean, renewable energy provides about 4% of US electricity production, but it takes over half of the subsidies that are paid to energy sources of all kinds.
Wow.
And the
not a lot of return on investment there when you look at it that way.
No, not a lot of return on investment. And so, I mean, that's a very significant issue for Canadians in provinces that have not yet seen these subsidies increase, because they will.
Yeah, I'm in southern Alberta, and of course where I am, we have lots of windmills, right? So can you tell us maybe the long-term net gain or cost of windmills according to their expected lifespan?
Well, the average windmill has a life of about an operating life of about 20 years. There, of course, the most important thing that one needs to know about windmills, as well as solar energy, is that it's an intermittent energy source. That is to say, it only produces energy when the wind is blowing. Typically across Canada, and I'm sure in Alberta as well, the windmills only produce energy somewhere between 30 and 50% of the time. And there are extended periods of time when they're not producing at all because the wind just isn't blowing. The effect of that is that they have to have backup sources of supply for when they're not producing. And typically, it's natural gas-fired generation that is used as backup supply. And what that, in effect, does is means that the utility has to have a double system. It pays for the windmills, and then it has to pay for the natural gas or other backup energy source.
That makes sense.
Over time, especially if we follow the proposals for decarbonization of the Canadian economy, governments will try to eliminate the natural gas backups, and we'll be left reliant on batteries, which are even more expensive. So it's the net effect of windmills and of solar energy has been to increase the insecurity or interruptibility of electricity supply, and in most cases to double the cost.
Isn't that fascinating? Wow. I mean, I know the wind blows a lot in southern Alberta, but you're kind of making it sound like there's an extra cost to that. Absolutely. So let's talk a little bit about oil and gas production in Canada. So what it is, in your opinion, what would be the economic benefit to Canadians from Canadian oil and gas production? It does seem like they're really trying to sort of squash that.
Well, oil and gas is one of the most important resource industries in Canada, if not the most important resource industry in Canada. In 2019, oil and gas produced over $122 billion in export revenues for Canada. It's more important than our exports of automobiles, which tend to get a lot more attention. But it's not just exports. It represents about 5.3% of our gross domestic product as well. And of course, much, much higher in the case of Alberta. In fact, in Alberta, the current estimate of the annual income is about $60 billion from oil and gas. Very, very significant for the revenues to the Alberta government and for the spin-off effects that it has on employment and investment in the province. The average government revenue from oil and gas that comes from taxes and royalties is over $13 billion over the last 5 years, which is an enormous amount. And as you said, governments tend to consider that they can significantly reduce production and do without it, but they have not yet figured out how they're going to replace that enormous amount of revenues.
Yeah. In your opinion, is there any other natural resource that could even come close to providing the same level of economic benefit as oil and gas?
No, well, there isn't. I mean, if you look at the contributions that are made to the resource industries to Canada's economy, oil and gas stands first. The closest one that comes after it is mining. And mining's share is about half that of oil and gas.
Can you maybe quantify the costs to Canadians of the pipelines not being built and having to import all that foreign oil?
Well, that is, of course, one of the really difficult issues, particularly for people who are living in Alberta. The costs that have been associated with the failure to construct additional pipelines come in different forms. They come first, of course, in terms of the foregone investment revenue and the foregone employment that would have been associated with the construction of those pipelines. They also come in terms of the cost of the revenue that would have been earned from the sale of the oil and gas that would have been transported by those pipelines. And finally, because the capacity of the existing pipeline system has not been enough to move Alberta oil and gas to the markets where it's demanded, producers have often had to sell their heavy oil, in particular, at a discount relative to what they would have otherwise got. So there's three different kinds of costs. Over the course of the last decade, largely as a result of actions taken by the federal government at the regulatory level, there have been a number of pipelines that have been canceled. They had, many of them went through 4 or 5 or sometimes 6 years of regulatory review only to be canceled as a result of that. The one that is particularly well known is the Northern Gateway Pipeline, which would have delivered oil to the British Columbia coast and exported it to Asia after that. And then the Northern Gateway Pipeline would have been built for about $8 billion, and that was canceled. The Energy East pipeline was a pipeline, an oil pipeline that would have gone to the other coast. It would have went to taken oil from Alberta to the East Coast, and from there it would have been exported either to Atlantic markets, either in the United States or Europe or elsewhere in the world. When that was canceled, there was an $8 billion loss in capital expenditures. And that doesn't include the losses that have occurred as a result of the failure to construct liquefied natural gas terminals on the British Columbia coast. There's been 3 major LNG terminals that have been canceled, largely as a result of a failure to deal with the regulatory constraints or to deal with some of the Aboriginal issues that have been concerned. In terms of the revenue that Canadian oil and gas producers have lost as a result of not having market access. I was just going to ask you that,
because I mean, that $8 billion mark it's a huge number, but then what would that return on investment have been?
Well, it's kind of just the return from the sale alone. It was over the period from 2014 to 2018 alone, the discounts that Alberta producers had to absorb resulted in a loss of $40 billion. I mean, that's you and I can't even imagine what $1 billion looks like.
It's unfathomable.
Yeah, exactly. Well, I mean, it's striking and it's tragic, and the reality is that until we start to build more energy infrastructure, we're not going to solve these problems.
Wow, I feel like we're only scratching the surface here, and we're running out of time. We're going to have you back for a part 2 of this.
Be glad to.
That was Robert Lyman. He spent over 4 decades mainly for the Canadian federal government working as an economist, manager, and consultant. I'm Jeanette Roche on behalf of all of us here at Bridge City News. Thanks for watching.